Hey everyone, Lauren here at Mill City Roasters. We are going to get into the first of 3 decaf coffees that I'm going to roast and you're going to watch. We're here on the 500 gram sample roaster. This is where I'm going to roast all of these coffees. Decaf isn't a coffee that you might necessarily have a very high demand for, so having a way to lower your batch size and roast less of it than you do for your other regular caffeinated coffees is going to allow you to maintain freshness and keep some, fresher roasted coffees on your counter, your retail shelves, or your brew bar more frequently. For all of these decaf coffees, I'm going to be roasting 350 batch sizes, 350 gram batch sizes. Before we get into the roast, I want to talk about how I developed this profile and what I'm trying to really highlight and showcase with this mountain water process decaf Mexico. Now we've got a washed decaf or washed regular Mexico on our website right now that is a staff favorite. It is a beautiful coffee full of really nice spice, savory notes that's balanced with a complex sweetness. It has a nice chocolatey characteristic. It does really well at a light, medium, and a dark roast. It's an incredibly versatile origin, and we were all really excited to bring it on. For a little while, we also had a decaf Mexico, and I always love to experience single origins from a decaf and a caffeinated perspective. I think it's a really great way to notice the flavor differences that the decaffeination process imparts upon the coffee, and really, again, just kind of explore that wide variety of flavors that we get from coffees from even different regions within one growing country. This is the first decaf that I tried to sample roast, and it went way too fast. My goal for a sample roast was to finish in about 7 to 8 minutes, have about a minute and a half in development, so that would put me at reaching first crack at around 5.5 or 6 minutes. And for my very first pass with this coffee, all of my values were too high. I ended up going to only 6 minutes and 20 seconds and dropping at 390 on the PID. So this coffee got a little bit too hot, a little bit too fast, and I knew that it wasn't going to really showcase its best qualities on the table as a sample cupping roast. So I went back to the machine and I just lowered my gas a little bit, I lowered my charge temperature, and I tried it again. With that second pass, I was able to have a sample roast that finished at 370 degrees in about 8 minutes flat. So that was really the goal. I still put both the coffees on the table when I did my sample cupping because I think all information is good information. In the case of these coffees on the sample roasting or the sample table, the side-by-side had a lot of similarities. I was getting a lot of toasted breadiness, that kind of combination of like enriched dough, butter, almost like a breadcrumb that you sort of toast in a saute pan with a little bit of butter. There was a really great natural sweetness that was very earthy, so it reminded me of green vegetables, sort of an unsweetened cacao, like a baker's chocolate. The body was very soft. In the slower roast, it had a nice drying characteristic that reminded me of white wine, very crisp. In that faster roast, the vegetal notes were really played up, which makes sense because that roast kind of went too fast, so the coffee still tasted quite green. My big sort of takeaway descriptors for this coffee were toasted breadcrumbs, sweet green flavors, slightly vegetal, cocoa, white grape, and earthy. I knew that I wanted to enhance the body of this coffee because it was something that was really lacking on the cupping table. And when we talk about roasting by phases, we always talk about the mid phase being a really key sort of driving phase for body, mouthfeel, and tactile cues. So by elongating the mid phase, I was really hoping to enhance the body of that coffee. I thought that this coffee would do well at a darker profile, darker than the other 2 decafs that I'll be roasting in other videos. Because of that vegetal sweetness and that cacao, there was some anise, some licorice flavors, some like mild spice. I just think that a darker profile was going to really enhance and highlight and showcase those flavors really well. So when I went back to the roaster to create a production roast for this, my goal was to spend more of my time in the mid phase than the either 2 phases. I wanted to have about 30 to 35% in the dry phase moving to about 45% in the mid-phase, and then finishing with a nice solid 20% in development. And for this profile, that ended up being about 3 minutes in development. So we're looking for a first crack around 6 minutes or so, and then a finish time of about 9 minutes. In the final cup, the production roast here, the sugars were really enhanced. I got a lot of caramel, sort of butter caramel, which is, I think, the natural progression of that like buttered breadcrumb note, where you're taking it sweeter and highlighting that caramelization, that Maillard reaction in those starches. We tasted flan, or almost like a cheesecake, sort of a savory, creamy, sweet, tart characteristic. Got some toffee, some lemon bar or lemon curd, notes of vanilla and citrus. The citrus, again, echoing what we tasted on the sample roast, where that citrus note has been showing up on the sample roast as a grapefruit, which is a little sour and a little bitter. Here in the production roast, it's a much cleaner, sweet lemon flavor. And you can kind of see how that would progress when you kind of slow that profile down. Finally, the last note was moon pie. Now, if you've never had a moon pie, it's like a cookie cake with marshmallow fluffing, stuffing all in the middle, and it's coated in really sweet milk chocolate. I love tasting notes like moon pie because they're complex and layered, right? There's a lot of flavors within that one flavor call, and if you can hit all of them when you're saying them and your customer can experience them, man, you've really earned their trust and you've really excited them and delighted them by showcasing those flavors. This decaf is processed using the mountain water process. It is leaving the coffee looking quite dark. I don't know if we can see this here in the video, but it looks, I mean, at first glance you would think, is this roasted? Is this green? I can't tell. It's very dark and the color is almost brownish green. It's really earthy. Now, I knew right off the bat, this is going to make it very hard to call dry end. That landmark moment between where the coffee is green to where it goes to yellow. And that's because this coffee doesn't really look green to begin with. It sort of looks a little brown to start. So what I did in preparing to roast this coffee is I just put some of this coffee in a cupping bowl, and I'm going to keep that with me by the trier so that when I'm approaching my dry end timing mark, I'm going to constantly be comparing what I see in the trier to what I see here in the bowl. And that's going to help me really identify that color change moment. I'm also going to trust my nose quite a bit. For me, when dry end happens, I notice a big sensory shift in the coffee where it goes from smelling sweet, like vegetables, like sugar snap peas, like fresh garden vegetables, where it goes almost quiet. I feel like the aromas really drop off for a moment and the coffee gets incredibly mild. And then right after that, it starts to pick up some of those bready, pasta, baked pastry flavors. That's really the moment that I know that we're out of the dry phase and we're into the mid phase. So if I have trouble calling dry end based on my visual cues, I'm going to trust my nose, and I'm also going to trust my PID because dry end really occurs at a pretty set temperature range. So all three of those things combined are going to help me really call that landmark. From there, I'm going to wait for first crack, which I should be able to hear very easily, and then we'll kind of go from there into our development phase. I'm coming down to my charge temperature very quickly. This roaster always surprises me how fast it drops. I've got my burners turned off, and I'm going to start the countdown on my roast path software. 3, 2, 1, and begin my roast. I'm just going to start my timer switch here as a sort of secondary timer. I'm going to do a 1 minute soak here with this roast, so 1 minute with the burners turned off. After that initial 1 minute phase, I'm going to turn my burners on to just 1 kPa. Now, this roaster maxes out at almost 4 kPa, so that's going to be about 24% of my maximum gas setting, and that's really going to be my highest gas setting for the entire roast. With these decafs, I think the name of the game is to go pretty gentle on heat application, no matter what your end goal is. Try to make sure that you're getting there in a pretty slow amount of time, and don't blast these coffees with heat. Because of that initial processing method that you get from the decaffeination, I think it leaves these coffees a little bit more delicate, kind of fragile, and I think that if you heat them up really, really fast with a lot of fuel in your burners, you could end up taking them too far, potentially scorching them, just getting them a little bit too hot too fast. So we hit 1 minute and my burner's up to 1 kPa. All right on time here. We're at dry end at about 320. I'm going to lower my gas just a hair to about 0.8 kPa. And that's really going to be the gas setting that kind of carries me out for the remainder of this roast. The next thing that I'm waiting for here is that first crack landmark, which I've got about 40, maybe 55 degrees to travel to then. My ROR is in the teens. It is right around 15 right now, and it's going to probably hover around there, 14, 15 ROR until after first crack. Now I did notice the coffee in the sight glass brightening up quite a bit. What we saw in the initial green coffee was a pretty dark, sort of greenish brown. Right before dry end, it lightened quite a bit. That makes sense. A lot of that moisture is kind of evaporating and coming out of the beans. So that color lightened before it turned sort of a light brown. That's kind of when I called dry end. As we approach 6 minutes on the timer, I have a good note for myself in my notebook. 6 minutes isn't a landmark. Nothing happened at 6 minutes, but when I developed this profile, I wrote 6 minutes, bean temperature 336. That kind of note is just going to help me know that I'm right on track, even though nothing's happening. So for me, as a newer roaster, it really helps me have a couple quick notes to show, you're on the right track, or hey, you're pretty far off track. As a roaster with a little bit less experience, I've only been roasting here at Mill City for about 2 years, is I try not to overcorrect. And I try to really trust the process. I'm hearing outliers at 7:05. I have a note in my notebook here that says 7-minute outliers. So again, just another quick confidence booster that I know that I'm where I'm supposed to be. Just bumping my air a little bit up. I started here with my air at 50 on the dial, and I'm just bumping it up to 60, which is sort of at the higher end of my medium air setting. Not going to get too aggressive with air because I don't have a ton of coffee in here. I'm going to go ahead and call that first crack at about 750, a little bit slower than my goal here for my roast, but I don't think it's too far off. And again, at this point, I'm just kind of start a mental timer for about 3 minutes. Shoot for a finished time of about 950. As long as that corresponds with my finished temperature, I'm going to try to kind of split the difference between the two there if I'm off track at all. My ROR is now steadily decreasing. I should be around 10 or 11 here as I enter my development phase. This is not a dark roast at all. When I used our color meter to evaluate roast color, I was in the mid-50s, 54.4, which is a very solid medium roast. Again, my finish time here will be almost 10 minutes, and I'm looking for a drop temperature of around 375, which is, I've got about 10 degrees to go here, and my current ROR is about 7, so I think I'll take that full time to get to my finished temperature. And I'm paying attention to a few things. Roast color, but also that smoothing of the coffee, how much it's expanded, puffed up. And I'm right at 10 minutes here, so I'm going to turn on my cooling tray, turn off my burner, and drop. Awesome. So as that cools, I'm looking back at my percentage of time spent in phases, which is automatically calculated here by my roast path profile. Looks like 35% of my time was in dry, which was right on for my production roast. That's 36%. 44 or 43 here in this current roast. 43% spent in mid. So like I said, most of my time here in mid, or the majority of my time here in mid, and then a solid 22% of time in the development. We will link this profile to this video if you want to view it afterwards. I'm really excited to taste this Decaf Mexico. Again, looking for those sweeter notes, caramel, marshmallow, graham cracker. This is a really, really lovely coffee to introduce newer decaf drinkers to, because it doesn't really taste like a decaf. It tastes like a really nice, solid, medium roast Latin American coffee. So I hope you enjoyed this. Tune in for our next 2 videos are going to be both EA Colombias, 2 different Colombia coffees, and the roast profiles will be different to highlight those coffees. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.